Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you all with us today. I'm Cait DeBaun, Vice President of Strategic Communications and Responsibility at the American Gaming Association. And I'm excited to kick off our first ever Responsible Gaming Education Month webinar with this esteemed group of speakers today. By expanding our traditional RG week to a full month in September, we've created an extended opportunity to highlight our industry's responsible leadership while continuing to strengthen our education through events like today's important conversation. As you all well know, empowering customers to play responsibly is essential to building a sustainable industry. And we've seen a lot of growth over the last few years and evolution of who we are and what we do. So the discussion and activity around responsible gaming is becoming more and more important, and the prioritization of it is clear. Today, we're going to talk about the state of the industry in terms of responsible gaming, the player protections the legal market provides, and a path to a sustainable future. I'm delighted to have three leaders with us today who have joined us for this conversation to share their thoughts. Let me briefly introduce them. We have Anika Howard, President and CEO of WONDR Nation, from the Mashantucket Tribal Nations online gaming company. Shane Lashkari of New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, who helped establish the state's regulatory framework for sports betting and oversees testing of all electronic gaming equipment approved in the state. And last but not least, Mark Vander, Director of Research and Responsible Gaming for the Massachusetts Gaming Council. Mark leads an active research agenda for the Commission, including RG, gambling disorders, and the social impact of gaming, among many other priorities. So welcome to our panelists. I'm going to moderate for the bulk of the conversation today, and then if we have time, bring in some audience questions, which you can put in the sidebar for review. So let's get to it. Let's start with an open question. How would you describe the state of responsible gaming today? And as the industry evolves and the gaming environment evolves, what are the two biggest challenges or opportunities we face when it comes to RG? So let us start with Anika.
Well, first and foremost, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be sharing the panel with all of these wonderful people. So when I think about responsible gaming, I really see it as being at the forefront of the industry, especially with all of the expansion. So when you look and most suppliers, essentially all suppliers and manufacturers have policies and procedures around responsible gaming. And it really is a joint effort. So it's not just the suppliers and the operators, but independent organizations, nonprofit advocacy groups, researchers, state regulators, all really kind of working together with the goal of reducing problem gambling and been really spreading the message, because I think collectively we've learned and seen in other more mature markets that responsible gaming, sustainable play is good business and good stewardship. For me, I think the biggest opportunity or biggest challenge I see facing the gaming industry really comes with how consumer behaviors and players are changing. When I think about what's happened over the past 3 years and the expansion of gaming, I'm really looking at it from a technology standpoint and seeing not just that, but how players and how people in general are consuming media and consuming technology at a very different and growing rate. So some statistics that I have been able to pull, media consumption, for example, for US adults continues to grow. And on average, I think the last time I saw it was about 4.5 hours a day that on average we spend on our mobile devices. And I think we've all, from COVID, have fallen victim to this idea of death scrolling through social media or through online. And so when you look at this combined with by next year, about 35% of all of media consumption is going to happen on mobile devices, we see that there's definitely a need to shift the way we communicate and talk about responsible gaming. And because customer behaviors are changing, I think some of the things that we need to do is really align the messaging and the tools that we give players with how those behaviors are changing. And a lot of these are still very traditional kind of 1-800 numbers. So what are the things that we can do differently to just make sure that we meet people where they are?
That's so right. I think technology has been a huge driver of the evolution of RG the last few years, and I'm interested to see where
Yeah.
that's going to go. And I think, Shane, you have been leading an effort around this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts generally about the state of responsible gaming, and then specifically how technology has helped there.
I just want to start off by echoing what Anika said, which is it's an honor to be here with everyone. I think this is a really important topic, and I do appreciate you putting this together, Cait, for everyone, because it's something that when it comes to responsible gaming, one of the biggest aspects of it is education, and doing things like this go a long way. And I do love the fact that you guys extended the Responsible Gaming Education Week to Responsible Gaming Education Month. I think all those things matter. I'm sure we'll discuss that later. But so I just wanted to echo those same sentiments that Anika mentioned. But to ultimately answer the question, I think we're at a really critical point. I think the key word for me when it comes to the state that we're in is critical. And the reason why I say that is because we all have the same common goal. All the industry stakeholders, operators, regulators, we all have the same common goal, which is essentially to make sure that we continue this sustainable industry. And in my opinion, one of the big critical success factors in sustaining that is responsible gaming. And so to that note, a big opportunity, the way we looked at it, was using and leveraging technology to help the operators potentially identify at-risk patrons. And that's a real key opportunity, because it's a situation where what we wanted to develop was something where the operators had the ability now to leverage all the data that they're collecting. Anika brought up a great point. Everyone is on their devices all of the time now. And everything that these patrons do is obviously being recorded by the operators. What pages you access, the amount of time you spend online, all of these things are being recorded. So we want to take advantage of that and utilize that information to essentially try to develop an early warning system for these operators. And so what they can then do is build upon these triggers that we recommended, these generated triggers based on play activity or account activity, all things that we can go into more detail in a little bit, but ultimately use those triggers to help them identify potential at-risk patrons. And that's why we feel that this is a critical moment, because as the industry is flourishing, we just want to make sure that everyone still stays focused on one of the key critical success factors, which is responsible gaming.
That's great. How, as you're thinking about that initial the initial introduction to this idea with the operators, how has that been? How's that conversation going? What does that look like?
No, it's a great question. It's one that when it comes to, we've been fortunate with the operators that we've been dealing with in New Jersey, that they also understand the significance of responsible gaming. And it's not just in regards to the responsible gaming best practices that we've come out with recently, but we also have an annual study that Rutgers University publishes. And part of that study is they make recommendations on different features that they can implement, the operators can implement, that will enhance the responsible gaming features. And us at the division, what we do is we take those recommendations very seriously, and then we work with the operators to implement those changes. And every single year when we've gone to the operators to implement those changes, they've always understood the importance of it, and they've always implemented those changes. So it's great for us to see that, because we can see that we're all partners in this same common goal of stressing the importance of responsible gaming. And so we've been fortunate enough with the operators we've been dealing with that they understand that fully, and they've invested a lot in terms of development in the past, and they continue to invest a lot, obviously, with the RG best practices that we're coming out with.
That's great to hear. Mark, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I know Massachusetts has been kind of forward in their responsible gaming protocols and requirements. And obviously, I had a great conversation earlier this week about responsible gaming as it relates to sports betting and the growing market there. So would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cait. Thanks to the AGA for sponsoring this. Responsible gaming is nothing new. It's been around for decades now, right? Undoubtedly, the conversation, priorities, what we know has evolved, especially, I think, within the past 10 years. And I like to think that one of the key pieces of that is, as Shane said, we can kind of coalesce around a shared goal, a sustainable industry. What does a sustainable industry means? How do we hold what does accountability mean? What does social responsibility mean? These are all things that it's not only important to me as a regulator, it's important to our operators in the state. And I think that, and increasingly so, our customers are aware that these are priorities that they think about when they choose where they want to go and how they want to spend their money. And so I think that has been an important piece of this. I think that responsible gaming has also become much more, rather than reactive, to thinking about how do we help persons who are exhibiting gambling-related harm. What types of resources do we need to do? Let's focus on the 1% to 2% of individuals that have a gambling problem, to something that's much more proactive as to how do we promote positive play? Mm-hmm. What does safer gambling look like? What tools do people need to have? What information do people need to have in order to stay in this safe sort of recreational zone? And I want to say that we're making strides, but we're a long ways from achieving this. That we're beginning to collect data that can inform this. Inform what safe levels of play look like. Inform what does healthy gambling look like, and begin to even dive down further in understanding what do we need to address with specific demographics of people or customers coming to our casino. What information do they need about gambling literacy or pre-commitment in order to help them stay in a safer level of gambling? So there's a long ways to go. The state of gambling in this country, in this world, continues to change. It's ever evolving, and I think that's out of necessity for the gaming industry. It's really hard to keep up, honestly. But I think, especially if we're on the same page, we can create some and do some really interesting work.
That's been interesting for me. I joined the AGA in 2019, and the growth, the evolution of the state of legal play in that time, and then responsibility layered on top of that has just been tremendous. And I've been impressed by, throughout that period, how collaboration has been so core to the success of those conversations and progress, that regulators and operators can work together and identify the best way to implement something, and that advocates and the industry can have conversations that are real and productive, and not so focused on what one party wants. And it speaks to the underlying goal that you all kind of reinforced around continuing to build a sustainable industry.
May I add, Cait, responsible gaming isn't a threat to the industry. Mm-hmm. And having conversations about providing different types of player protections and tools and resources, I think that the conversation has changed from one where it's seen as by the industry with a lot of skepticism to one where I think the industry sees that these are a great benefit overall to the industry. Yeah. They know their customers and they know what they want, and they're speaking about this.
That's exactly right. So, one major benefit of the legal market to that point is the emphasis on consumer protection and responsible gaming. We also know that illegal operators, something the AGA is quite focused on, especially with the growth of legal gaming. They don't care about RG. They don't provide any training, any tools or resources to players. So let's talk about the intersection of the illegal market, responsible gaming, and how legal operators kind of shift that conversation. Shane, we're just talking about the new protocols in New Jersey, the best practices that you're kind of putting in place around automatic triggers and other kind of resources for the space. How is that change enabled by technology? I think that's been an interesting piece of this, how responsible gaming has evolved as we've gone from brick and mortar to online. And I'll be curious to see how we evolve that backwards too. So I'd love to hear how technology is helping there.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And just, I think Mark brought up some great points to hit on that. It really becomes about being proactive in this process. And to his point, you have that small percentage, 1% to 2% of the at-risk patrons, but we need to find a way of trying to educate them and letting them know what's available as far as the responsible gaming features what's as far as help resources, what's available. And I think that was a great point. And I think that was part of our goal when we were creating these generated triggers, these system generated triggers, was based on all of the information that was being collected, it would be able to easier identify a patron that could potentially be at risk and then educate them on here are all the different features that are available. So what our thought process is, as we mentioned before, knowing that the way their technology stack was built and that they were going to be recording all of these different metrics that were going to be available, whether it's the deposits, the time of play, how long you've been online, whether it was you access this page. We basically wanted to break it down to two main categories. And we broke it down to the play behavior versus account activity. And we took each subsection, so for example, play activity, and knowing that their technology stack was going to essentially store all this information on, here's how often Shane deposits, here is his average deposit amount. Here are the scenarios where for the previous week, Shane's average bet amount was this, but now we're starting to notice that it's creeping up a little bit more. We're noticing that every single time that Shane wagers or starts a session, he continues wagering until there's no funds left. Now, again, there could be some good reasons for that. It could be because the patron was doing really well, hit for a lot of major jackpots, and he wants to cash it all out. But it gives the operator the opportunity to go through and actually evaluate my session and my play. Well, wait a minute, is that really what's happening with Shane's activity? Or is it every time he's depositing, he's wagering, it's not even that he's winning, he's just continuously playing and playing and playing until there's no funds left. So we really wanted to look at it from that perspective. Again, the key being we knew that the technology stack they had was going to be storing all this information. Then we said, okay, well, that's the play behavior. But what other items do we know that the technology stack is storing that we can use to our advantage? That's where we then focused on the account activity. So we wanted to really focus on, are there scenarios where if, for example, Shane goes on a cool-off period or a timeout, and then as soon as he comes off the timeout, within a reasonable time, a couple of days after, maybe a week or two after, he puts himself back on. Well, that could be an indicator of, well, we might have a little bit of an at-risk potential patron here, so let's look into that. Or the scenarios of, well, we're noticing that Shane's doing a lot of canceled withdrawals. Every single time he goes to withdraw some funds, he's canceling them, and then he's going to go and start wagering them again until he has no funds left. Things along those lines. Or maybe you go to the self-exclusion page and then you wanted to self-exclude from online gaming, but then as you went through the process, you left the page and you didn't complete that page. But again, knowing that the key was their technology stack was going to be storing all this information, we took those two broad categories, play behavior and account activity, and we trimmed it down to what we thought would be really critical in developing a quote-unquote early warning system so that, to Mark's point, we can then have the operators be in a position where maybe based on their due diligence as they look at these automated triggers, they'd be able to identify, are there certain individuals that we need to reach out to? And that's the key. One part of it was going to be implementing these generated triggers, the system triggers, but the other key piece, which is just as important, is what they do with that information and do it in a timely manner. And that's where we then wanted to focus on the operators having an RG dedicated team that would ultimately be reviewing this data. It's one thing to have the data, it's another thing to do something productive with the data. And so we wanted to mandate there'd be an RG dedicated team that would go through this data, and after their due diligence, if they were able to identify certain patrons could use a little bit more education in terms of what responsible gaming features are available, they would be able to reach out to them. And so that was really the vision of how we wanted to utilize their technology stack to get us to that end game of, to Mark's point, how do we proactively reach out to these patrons?
That's great. It's this year I've had the opportunity as we've come out of the pandemic. I have a lot of RG contacts within our member companies, and oftentimes just the one person in charge who oversees RG. And with some of the conferences this year, I've been able to meet the depth of the bench they have, and to see kind of how passionate those folks are about creating an environment where players are having fun and keeping it fun has been really eye-opening and rewarding.
And it goes back to what you had mentioned before, where the key is the collaboration. Everyone needs to collaborate together, because ultimately, as everyone works together, is when you're going to be able to create that ideal model, as opposed to one entity thinking they're just the expert in this field. But using everyone's resources together is what's going to get us to that ideal model then, and just using everyone's input, because people have different experience in different areas and different jurisdictions that they may be able to provide guidance on.
Anika, as you've been building responsible gaming, what does that look like? How are you building it into the company?
No, and so it's good. So I want to echo some things that both Shane and Mark brought to the forefront. So there's always an opportunity to do more. And so beyond the technology that can be embedded into the app, we're doing a lot to work directly with the local nonprofits in our area and treatment centers to really understand what the specific needs and goals are, and really focus on the idea of, once again, collaboration keeps on coming up, but having and creating custom messaging and reaching and training different audiences. So some of the feedback we receive, for example, are that especially, and this is specific to Connecticut, but I think it has broad applicability across other regions, that in each of the different regions, whether it's socioeconomic, ethnic groups, or just kind of different motivations, everyone has slightly different motivations and triggers. And so really, in many cases, looking beyond the standard one-size-fits-all messaging, and how do we work with all these treatment centers to customize the message on so that the right message for prevention, for education, for awareness is given to that right segment and in a way that they can understand. So some of it may be as easy as having bilingual messaging, or having things in multiple languages. Other things may be, very specific in terms of research that they've done with behavioral psychologists to say that this segment, these are the reasons that they're playing. These are the reasons that they might start developing some type of compulsive behaviors. And here are the types of messaging that might work best for them. So a lot of it is really to the point of, we're at this place where everyone, I think, is unified and wanting the same thing. And so how do you do more than kind of write a check, and what are the things that you can work with and collaborate and understand causation, in addition to having that technology. So a big portion of what we're focusing on are the prevention education up front.
That's great. And I know, Mark, you, as you've been looking at advertising this year, have paid particular attention to kind of diverse audiences and how advertising can impact them. So I would love to hear, as you're thinking about building this in Massachusetts and what you've learned from the casino space, what are you hearing from the public? What are you addressing and thinking about as you build out these regulations?
Yeah, let me just start by saying this is a really complicated issue to try to get our arms around, especially as a regulator, getting our arms around this, because it extends far beyond our reach and our span of control within the state. But it's certainly an issue that is garnering increasing attention around the country, around the world, really. And so, and I don't believe that the science and research is really keeping up on this issue. So I'm painting kind of a dark picture, because it is so complex, and we're trying to kind of figure out our path forward on this. We do know some things. We do know that there's a lot of attention on it, and there's a lot of concern expressed by the general public. We in Massachusetts, even in advance of sports wagering being legalized, or a law passing on August 1st, we certainly aren't launched at this point. There was attention and concern being raised. We have done some research that has drawn attention to the role of advertising in creating gambling-related harm, or contributing to gambling-related harm, especially amongst specific higher risk populations. Once we have that research in hand, we have a role, we have an obligation to do something with that research. Perhaps it's doing more research. Perhaps it's just trying to say, this is a nugget of truth that came from this, Now, what else do we need to know? What more research do we need to do? So in addition to having some research under our belt that sort of sheds light on this issue, we have added to our research agenda in Massachusetts another study that should be delivered by mid next year that will hopefully provide some more information for us to kind of hold on to. We've received a lot of public comment in a more formal way to support and the Commission's efforts in beginning to address this in a meaningful way, both in terms of our existing regulations as well as sports wagering regulations that are coming around. Some of this is outlined and organized in a white paper that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission released a couple months ago. Within that white paper are a number of considerations for the Commission to consider as we're promulgating regulations moving forward. It's not only just regulations that would say, don't provide misleading information in your advertising, don't market to underage, but it's also, what are the measures that, what's the recourse? If somebody is concerned, what do they do and what do they do with that? Who do they report it to? It includes a training component for operators within the state of Massachusetts about advertising and about higher risk populations. And it kind of goes back to this. I want to backtrack to, I think that the industry is aware of this as well, and it's not escaping them. I think it's trying to figure out how do we all get on the same page with this. We'll write regulations that can address some piece of this, and I don't anticipate that there's too much controversy around what those regulations would look like. But it's where do we not have control? Mm-hmm. What's happening with the illegal market and how they're trying to jump ahead? What's happening kind of at national advertising level that kind of escapes any state regulators? These are the complicated issues, and I really hope that at a certain point, organized by the AGA or some other body, where we can sit down and figure out what some of the ground rules are on advertising that we can all get behind. Much like responsible gaming in general, where I think that we've seen this evolve from some really good ideas to more of a science that is accomplishing good things.
Yeah, the advertising issue is, I think, one of the places where there's so many different issues to address, right? You have to think about making sure we can be competitive with illegal market. You have to make sure that you're not causing harm via advertising. You need to make sure that there's research into whether that is a thing that happens and how does it happen. And so it's a place of a lot of conversation and a place where a lot more knowledge sharing and research needs to happen. And I think this is such a unique market when you look at the global space. There's often questions around the US versus the UK versus other more mature sports betting markets. And to me, it's not necessarily apples to oranges. There's sure common threads, but I think there's some lessons that we need to investigate on our own in order to make effective, regulation and operate in a responsible manner. I don't know if anybody wants to add in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say one piece that kind of it came up in a responsible gaming roundtable that Cait, you were a part of on Tuesday that the Gaming Commission hosted, is that there was a lot that came up around advertising. One thing that I thought was a good idea, advertising oftentimes has the list of helpline numbers, and certainly there would be great movement towards having one helpline number that was easy to understand so people could get help. But there's also it would be great if there was responsible gaming advertising that stood alone, that kind of balanced balanced out the advertising that exists for sports wagering and other forms of gambling.
Yeah, that's two issues I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last few years, and I know everyone here has. On the helpline, with 1-800-GAMBLER in New Jersey, we're seeing great progress with kind of nationalizing that. And there's a lot of things to unpack in that space. That could be a whole other webinar. We're actually going to talk a little bit about it later this month at our second RG webinar. And then on the advertising side, I think we're starting to see more folks lean into that. We have at the AGA our Have a Game Plan, Bet Responsibly campaign. We're bringing a lot of folks on board with that, but operators are also taking. We spent a little bit of time on Tuesday talking about DraftKings' new campaign with Tony Hawk, and I think we're going to see more and more of that because operators understand, the critical importance of getting RG out there. Shane, what were you going to add?
No, the only thing I was going to say was I also read that document that Mark had mentioned as far as what the Massachusetts Gaming Commission produced, and I just thought it was a really nice job. So I just wanted to say that when I read through it, what I liked most about it was they really broke the advertising standards down, or the requirements, regulations, in really two key areas. It was not only the frequency of the advertisements, but it was also the content. Like to Mark's point, as far as some of the things that were displaying to the patron, as far as no free bets and what that actually meant for the patron. I think they did a really nice job of really isolating the two key areas when it comes to advertising, which was going to be the content and the frequency. And then as far as what you had mentioned about the 1-800 number, Kate, I think that's a great point, because like we mentioned before, education is one big piece of responsible gaming, and then accessibility would be the other big piece. And now that we have that standard 1-800 number where you don't have to have all these different numbers people have to remember, it's just one standard number no matter what state you're in, that's huge from the accessibility point of view. And
there's still a good number of states, I think it's about a dozen right now, who have changed regulation to allow for 1-800-GAMBLER or a national helpline on national or multi-state advertising. And then there's a few others, and I think that's one of the places where I've seen more collaboration is needed and education, making sure that regulators understand what that change would mean and how it would impact, the ultimate consumer experience. So let's change topics a little bit. Part of RG and how we interact with our customers comes from employees, and especially in the brick and mortar space, they're the front line of engaging with customers and identifying, potentially problematic behavior, or even just saying, we have this resource, think about, setting your limits or what have you. So, Mark, going back to you, obviously GameSense is a big part of what happens in Massachusetts at the brick and mortar level. What lessons can be drawn from that as you think about online and the growth of gaming?
To me, GameSense is about promoting positive play. It's about providing people with the information they need so they can make an informed choice about gambling. It's easier for me to wrap my arms around this in a brick and mortar casino. At each casino in Massachusetts, we have a GameSense Information Center. Within that GameSense Information Center, we have highly trained, really skilled GameSense advisors that can have these types of conversations that accomplish those goals and work towards that. I think that as we move into an online space, I think we can accomplish those same two goals. Our strategies or our tactics may have to shift in how we go about doing that. But I think it's it's a program that is well positioned to move into an online space, to add sports wagering into the conversation of responsible gaming. There's a lot that we know again about how to promote positive play and about how to create informed player choice. It's changing the avenue and the channel on how we go about doing that.
Shane, with a more mature online market, how have you seen that transition from RG to in the retail experience to online, and even anything you've seen go kind of back into the brick and mortar space?
I think the real key advantage to online gaming is the fact that there's no anonymous play. And the idea that now with online gaming, you removed the anonymous play, it makes it so easier to reach out to the appropriate people that need the additional information as far as education is concerned with responsible gaming future. That's one key aspect. If you were to say the differentiation between brick and mortar and online, and why is it maybe a little bit easier when it comes to responsible gaming on the online side, it's really because of that, in my opinion. The fact that there is no more anonymous play, and now the operators have the ability to say, wait a minute, we know who this is, we know what we have to do, we've put the right tools in the right people's hands, and they just need to do their due diligence now. And I think that's the key. Whereas with brick and mortar, if there's anonymous play, it's a little bit harder to really track what's going on. Now, of course, if they have a loyalty card put in, it's a little bit different. But if that's not the case, it's just so much easier in the online environment. And that's a key aspect we need to take advantage of.
Anika, how about you? What have you seen kind of go from one space to the other and vice versa?
Same, technology definitely makes it easier. It makes it easier to identify and to work and to with players to communicate and identify kind of the problem areas. A lot of the initiatives and tools that Shane detailed earlier, all of those things make it much, much easier, compounded with the fact that you don't have any anonymous play. From a training perspective for team members, it also makes it easier as well. There are lots of online tools, a lot of things that you can do to facilitate training in a much easier fashion. I think, in terms of having that joint campaigns, joint initiatives, sharing of information. I mean, just recently, for example, with the AGA, we our marketing team has all of the kind of that entire great toolkit of all of that information from social all the way down, and that was distributed. And it's something that then allows to have this great consistent message about, what are the things that are important, what are the things that we're reinforcing. So from that standpoint, I think we learned a lot of what the structure of a responsible gaming program needs to be from the retail, and then we've been able to perfect that and really streamline it with the use of technology now that a lot of things have come online.
I'm excited to see as we, get RG kind of not settled, but as we advance it in the online space, 2-3 years from now, how do we bring that back into the retail space? And I think payments modernization is a key way that happens, because there's a lot of tools that are enabled when you have that kind of technology. We've talked a lot about collaboration. I think we all feel it in this space. And we talked about how good we are at it, but how can we do it better? What do you all see as a way that we can better collaborate? Anika, why don't we go back to you?
So I think there are a number of things. I look at it from two levels. I think we were talking about responsible gaming, but I think when you get to the core of why responsible gaming is important is that there is compulsive gambling, and that is it is an issue. It is a disease in the same way that you have alcohol abuse, etc. And in many cases, I don't necessarily think it has the same level of rigor and structure around treatment for that. So I feel like there's opportunities to extend what we've done with a lot of the regulators, et cetera, to turn that more towards working with universities, hospitals, behavioral psychologists. What are some of the things that we can do to put together a more structured program for when someone has a challenge and when someone has a problem, for getting the proper help and getting the proper funding to be able to do some of those initiatives, and understanding that it only affects a very small percentage of the overall population. It's not just that person, it's the family structure, it's a lot of other things that are impacted. So I feel like there's opportunity for us to do things there. And I think the other piece of it, I keep on going back to this intersection between technology and treatment. Because we spoke a lot about having the 1-800 number, and I think that's a good starting point. But as people are changing, I don't know the last time I actually called a 1-800 number. So are there other things? Are there chat? Are there things that are embedded to the mobile that can, is there text kind of initiatives? Like, what are some of the other things in addition to that we can start looking at collectively that will help with not just treatment, but even just kind of communication and outreach. So I think right now, as the technology is evolving, there are lots of different opportunities that we can learn from other industries, or even just bring in terms of keeping that dialogue open. So I love everything that we're doing. I feel like, if we're looking at some of the things that we can do an additional, we always can do more. And those are two areas that I think working together, we can find additional paths forward on.
I think that's right. Mark, what are places we can better collaborate?
I think there's so many different directions we could go here, Cait. I want to say two things, 2 points. One is I want to give a perfect example of collaboration, and then I want to say where I think we need to really go. Massachusetts launched a tool called Play My Way. It's a slot machine-based budgeting tool that people can enroll at the slot machine as long as they have a player's card, set a budget, receive notifications or reminders to track their play. This is something that's very common in the online space, but it hasn't really been done in a brick and mortar on a slot machine, at least in the United States. We launched this as a pilot program with Plain Ridge Park Casino, a Penn Gaming property, and extended it to MGM Springfield and Encore Boston Harbor. Each step of the way, we move forward without a regulation. As a regulatory agency, moving forward without a regulation is kind of an interesting place to be, but it was a shared commitment to wanting to explore what is the utility of a tool like this and how can we do it. And there were certainly pieces that our operators brought to the table, what they know about the industry and about their patrons, that needed to be coupled with sort of the priorities of the Gaming Commission in this space. So that was all through a memorandum of understanding to advance an important responsible gaming tool. Where we need to go, I'm going to focus on research because we're flying in the dark to some degree here. We have some research, and I can paint it with rose-colored glasses that we have information and we are advancing responsible gaming, but it moves quickly and we don't necessarily have the research or resources for research that back it up. The Mass Gaming Commission has a pretty robust research agenda that begins to chip away at what we need to know. The International Center for Responsible Gaming contributes to that. Different states contribute to that a little bit. Universities contribute to that to a certain degree, but there's so much more that we can do, and we're this field we want to create a field of responsible gaming. We want to help people. We want to reduce gambling related harm, help people gamble responsibly. Research is a driving force in that. People say, what's your research that backs up X? And we can point to a small amount of research maybe, but this body of research continuously needs to grow. And I think that there's a role of the industry in both funding and assisting researchers. I think there's a role of regulators of prioritizing this. I think there's a role of state governments to say, let's lead with this rather than have it something be an add-on. And I think the federal government, quite honestly, has dropped the ball on it and needs to step up.
Research is something we talk a lot about. I know ICRG has been doing a lot of great work this year in terms of getting the funding in and finding those opportunities. But, it's like you said, chipping away at a big block. Shane, what are you thinking on collaboration? Obviously, there's been some collaboration with these new best practices, but where can we collaborate better?
No, I think Anika and Mark did a great job of bringing up and highlighting all the key points, whether it was additional accessibility. Research is absolutely key. I think developing and having that research and developing an action plan from that research, like Mark had mentioned, is absolutely critical. Having that continuous commitment from the operators is also critical. Knowing that they're really considering this just as much as we are as a critical success factor is huge, because that just trickles down. And what the operators can then do is ensure that all of their employees, especially the ones who are dealing with the patrons, are properly educated when it comes to responsible gaming and can work with the patrons. And so I see a lot of commitment that needs to be done there. That continuous commitment, rather, still has to occur. And like Mark mentioned, with that research, it's absolutely key. It's been beneficial for us in New Jersey with the research Rutgers University has done. We've been able to improve some of the responsible gaming features we've had because of that research that's been implemented. So it's definitely something that is still going to be important for us down the road. And then, as Anika mentioned, the accessibility and trying to find other ways to make it easier for people to get the information that they need. I think they really hit on all the key points.
That's right. You answered one of the audience questions around, has the Rutgers research led to changes and what that looks like? So it's been interesting for me to see that kind of play out. And Dr. Nauer, I know, is, getting that data and learning as much as he can from it to make us all kind of improve upon the environment. I know we're getting close to time here, so a couple final questions, thoughts, but what does the future hold for responsible gaming? Where are we headed? Let's go back to you, Anika. Where are we headed?
I'm sorry about that. So I think we kind of summed it up a lot in this presentation. I think a lot of it is kind of finding that balance, finding the balance between as the technology is evolving, those points where we can really extend what we're doing and really hold everyone accountable and really taking the collaboration to the next level. There's a lot of things that are happening and that are moving forward. And so I think it's really as quickly as the technology is changing and a lot of the regulations are coming on board, I think I love what Shane and the work that they're doing in New Jersey. I know we looked a lot to that, and especially happening in Massachusetts. And so it's really, I think, working together and finding these best practices and then taking it and having this kind of idea of cooperative competition. So what are the things that we can do that we can work together to all move everything forward in a positive way?
Right. Mark, where are we headed?
I'm inspired by the work of New Jersey, and because, as you said, Anika, I think that technology-driven responsible gaming is where we need to go. It was a few years I was at a conference and somebody said responsible gaming used to be easy. This is not easy, and it's not about just providing information anymore. It's really driving ahead and anticipating what patrons, what customers need, and how we can move towards sustaining responsible gaming, sustaining recreational play, but also then how do we modify gambling behaviors in a way that reduces gambling related harm. And I think that there's a lot that can be learned, especially in an online space. We know everything about the gambling behavior, and that should absolutely be utilized. There's a lot that we don't know too. All that we have is gambling behavior. So where does responsible gaming move in trying to couple that information about gambling behavior with other types of behavior, with other information about the patron that can be used then to advance responsible gaming? And I think there's an enormous potential in that space.
That's great. Shane, what about you? Where are we headed?
Well, I mean, first off, I just want to say I appreciate the kind words, but I do truly mean it when I say we're all partners in this together. Regulators, operators, we're all partners in this, working together to really have this sustainable long-term industry. So I do appreciate those kind words, but I do believe that we're all adding a lot of value. And so to answer your question, though, ultimately, I just want to keep the momentum going. Like we mentioned at the top of the webinar, what you guys did, the AGA did to extend that responsible gaming education week to a month is huge. As far as accessibility, we've talked about the 1-800 number. Mark brought up a great point. We know a lot now, but we know there's more to learn. And so for me, the key is we got to keep the momentum going, the collaboration going, the commitment from everyone going, so that we can continue this flourishing industry while maintaining and just increasing the RG efforts. And so we need to continuously look at it from perspective of incremental improvements. We know it's not going to be perfect at the beginning. It's just constantly evaluating it, determining what lessons learned we can pick up on and where we can improve. And over time, those incremental improvements will be huge.
That's right. As I've learned over the last 3.5 years, there's going to be a tremendous amount of change that comes from RG, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a month, but we can make steps and strides to, improve and grow and ultimately, continue to build a sustainable market. So that's what excites me. That's why I, do this job and we get to have the privilege of working with smart people like you who are trying to make a difference and push and pull where needed. So that gets us towards the end of our time. I want to thank my panelists here today for your great insights, your work on a daily basis to advance responsible gaming. I would be remiss not to encourage everyone to sign up for our next webinar on September 27th, talking more about technology and modernization efforts. And then I hope to see all of you at Global Gaming Expo a month away from now. And if you're interested in responsible gaming, it'll be a big topic of discussion on Tuesday. We have a great lineup with some great voices joining us. So hope to see you all there, and head over to americangaming.org for more about RG Month and the resources we have related to responsibility. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.